Hi everyone, today we're going to take a closer look at the mysteries of manual maps, be it either on the terrain itself or on the water shader. So I've prepared a Nodescape based terrain, which I did, and put it in here. I'm going to let you follow along while I'm texturing this terrain very roughly, maybe 2 grounds and 1 cliff, and then a water, mesh and shader, and then we're going to take a closer look at the manual map options we have and how we use them. You can skip forward. I'm trying to include a marker in the description where we're actually finished with the texturing, but for everyone who just wants to follow along how I approach the texturing process, you're more than welcome to stay and watch and maybe go along. So this terrain, let's double check, it's scaled to 1, 480 and 3 meters long, 240 wide, 110 meters high, so we got real world dimensions. We have 101,000 faces. That is currently okay, but we have some options to get those down if we experience lag in our project workflow. Okay, so let's have a to true terrain, add a material. As always, first biome, first material is put in there. The scale of the material displacement, we could go with 10 or 5. Let's go with something in the middle like 8, and go to, you know what, let's use the Burgle pack I have used as well. Let's do some green stuff on the ground. Go to settings. What do we need? Shader and texture mapping. This is, I think I've scaled it up by 50, so 50 should give us a good first indication, and it does. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Let's play with displacement a little bit, as we have something like this. I'm mainly concentrating on these parts here right now. Yeah, let's leave it like this for the moment. We can play with that afterwards. We are going to take a secondary ground to break this up. Let's take a look at the blend settings. Black is the new secondary ground. Let's open up our options available to us. So as I said, if I would put this to 0, then we would only have the secondary ground, and I want it the other way around. So let's move to 0.8 or something like this, and the other way around here. If I would put this to 1, only the initial ground would be visible, and I want more of the, yeah, something like this. Yeah, 0.2. And then we can add some detail, play with the edges and optional settings in here. I like to do that and see what kind of difference we get. And I want this mainly in this area, so let's move it along the axis a little bit. Maybe like so, because I'm not bothered about these patches, because that's where our cliffs will be anyhow. But something like this could work as well. Let's put something from the Berg pack in here as well, something contrasty. Well, why not use the first one here? I'm too lazy to repeat the whole process of texturing, of scaling and displacing, so I'm moving back to ground. Click the 3 dots in here, copy values to ground secondary, and we have, yeah, it's still, let's go back to ground secondary. It looks good, but that's not realistic to scale. So what I'm going to do is go to my texture mapping and decrease this to like 30, something like this, and maybe, as these are stones, increase this to 5. Yep. Okay. Again, we don't worry about the geometry here because we haven't applied any displacement yet, so we're going to do this afterwards. And now we're going to bring in our cliff, activate it. Lots of cliff in here, too much for my liking. So let's go to blending, basic, advanced, mixed, ground cutoff we don't need. Let's go down to 0.2, so much less cliff will be visible. Make it even smaller by doing it like so. We've got a little bit of cliff here, could look nice. Let's give it a try. So we got the brown stuff will be our cliff. So head over to our burgle-me pack and take something contrasty like the white one, and with this one we're going to do it manually. So let's go to texture mapping and give it 100, and that's actually not bad at all. 0.4, that's okay, but I really think we need to decrease the displacement here to 0.3, something like this, and I'll just take another one, maybe this one. Yeah, that one looks good. And let's move over to our ground. I've got 0.3, 0.3, make this 0.2, and go back to our cliff and maybe 0.3 as well, and get rid of the texture seam. And what else could we do? We could play with this size a little bit to see what kind of effect we can achieve. And maybe we should take something more dark, like this one. Yeah, looks good as well. What happens with 50? It looks good as well, because that's not actually what this tutorial is all about. Okay, now we're going to add some water. As you already probably might know, I'm a big fan of the Tropical Lagoon shader. Bring this in, scale it up by 100, so that should give us enough geometry. Bring it down where we can fill our lake. And with this in place, we get a better perspective, or a better view on the perspective. Let's get rid of the floor grid by clicking here. This looks okay. Yeah, just let's make it a little bit wider, and that's okay. Apply the scale. You know by now it will revert back to a plane. So what we're going to do is, because we will need that later, we're going to put the offset to -1, yes, -1, and then just add this to 10 meters. We can link this out, increase the, or just move our plane up where we want the water to be. Okay, that's that for the moment, so we can play with the water settings a little bit. So I left the lagoon water, gives me this green gradient in here. I'm always, you know, a tad to the right and a tad downwards on the brightness. That's just what I like, but you can put any color in here. And so that would be our initial landscape with a mountainous lake or pond or whatever. Okay, now let's talk about wetness maps, or how you can achieve wetness, shoreline and foam. So let's start with foam. There are three ways you could add foam to your water. So the first thing is, let's make this let's finish this, because when adding, scaling and then solidifying the plane, we could increase this like 50 to 20. Let's go to 10. And the ripple intensity we carefully increase like so. And as you can see, we get some geometry in here, which is exactly what we wanted. Okay, good. Now, before we, so the first thing how we can create foam is by going into a foam, and foam is actually turned off. So let me turn it on, and what does happen? Absolutely nothing. Why? Because the default setting is enable paint map, and we don't use a paint map right now. So let's turn this down to 0, and nothing much happened, but the eagle-eyed viewers of you will see we got some dots in here. So what we could do is, or what we should do if we want to do it like this, we're just going to increase the distance, the artistic choice, and you will see that by increasing that, you can also already see it in the viewport. This is too much, at least to my liking, and this does create some artificial foam based on some calculations. I don't know, some wizardry of the True FVX guys. And we could leave it like that. I mean, we could fiddle with the visibility like 1, and it would not be that pronounced, as you can see. Well, let's just double check if I'm, so let's move this in a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. So we've got this foam set up just by playing with the artistic distance and the visibility, and you can make it extremely blatant. Just put a 10 in here and that would be your foam. It looks pretty harsh, but if you click on high calculations, it's not going to change that much in your viewport shader. But if we give this a quick render, maybe it is a quick render, just let us see. Looks promising. You can see that the foam doesn't look that bad. And please, you know, some of you might say, but the terrain looks horrible. Yes, but we don't have any sort of subdivision modifier applied to it. We could play with that, but we're not going to bother with it right now, because that's not, as I said, the goal and the content of this follow along video. But what you could also see is that here it says slow, and it really is slowing down the render. However, if we would get over the initial 7, then it usually jumps to like something like 40, and then there is a quick, at least that's what I'm experiencing in Blender 3.0, that there is a scope of samples. It really rushes through. So there is the 32, 48, and then it should move along pretty quickly. Yeah, you can see it now. And then it stops at 240. Yes, there it is. And it shouldn't take long. Yeah, but look at the water. It actually doesn't look that bad. So that's the first options how we can very easily bring in foam. And let's save that, and the next render will be in slot 2. Now, let's turn foam off again, turn high calculations off again, and revert back to the initial default settings. The second thing we could do is, and that's, we need to do some preparation. First of all, we go to edit mode and select our surface of the water, and this is only possible or visible because we put the solidifier on -1. I can show you, no problem at all. If you would leave that at 0, the plane would be actually, the solidifier would actually go up and down the same way. So the plane we could select is in the middle and it's not visible right now. And the same would apply if we put it to 1. The plane should be on the low side, as you can see, and it is. So let's do -1 again, sorry, -1. So we have our top surface of the water selectable. We right click, we click on subdivide and go like something like 80. Should not be a real problem, but we need some sort of geometry for the next step. And the next step is that we're going to paint manually where we want foam to be. So again, we select our water mesh and we go to vertex paint. White is foam. Foam is usually white. So if we paint on this, nothing is visible. However, something is created in here, and we just get rid of this. What I like to do, you probably can do it differently, and some of you might have a much better approach to this. What I would like to do is I'm turning this color here to black, and then go to paint and set vertex color or Shift K. Then our material has become black. Don't worry, let's go to object mode and take a look at the render right now. It didn't change anything the way the material is being displaced here. Displayed here. So again, let's go to vertex paint, go to our shaded window, we've got the black, and then we are going to paint our foam, let's say like so, close to the cliffs in here, maybe give it some, and then something like this, like here. We can play with blur. It's totally up to you. And there's a very famous painter once said, this is your world and you can do whatever you want with it. So we've painted white on a black mesh, on our water mesh. Now let's go back to object mode, turn on our viewport shading, and voila, we don't see anything. Why? We did not turn on foam. So let's do that. We need to enable paint map because we painted something in. And we still don't see anything. And this is because we need to actually connect that to our water shader. So if you go to your shader editor and just click here because everything is selected, move the image texture away, and here we've got a foam map vertex color. As you can see, vertex colors have been created on this mesh, so we could rename this as ever we want, or we just click in here and select what we have created here. And then we're connecting the foam color here, the vertex color, to the manual foam section manual. And our foam is painted in. Again, we could go to high calculations. It would also create a better render of the foam. We can still use these values to increase the visibility. 2 is fine for me, and you can also, well, the visibility should not really change because we have made it pretty clear where our foam is, so that does not override our painting. So let's go back to this one and give this a quick render as well and compare it to the first one. We still got the slow on. Beg your indulgence and see what the results of that approach is. So again, here is our painted foam map. And again, so that's how you can actually paint your foam exactly where you want on your water. And after we have seen the results and compared it to the first one, I'm going to show you the third option, which you probably know by now. So the water is going in. This is working pretty well. So as you can see, the last render took, so this one took 1 minute. That's our foam and water. First one is the artificial one, and took 20 seconds longer, but that's just because I think there's more foam to it. Again, totally up to you how you want to set this up. Now we're going to do the third one. Preparing the third slot. We are going to back to our shader and disconnect our foam map, so nothing is in here, but that's just because I think there's more foam to it. Again, totally up to you how you want to set this up. Now we're going to do the third one. Preparing the third slot, we are going to back to our shader and disconnect our, we don't need this to be color, so it's non-color. And the same thing as here, we're going to connect the color with the manual socket in the foam section. And we can see that foam is being displaced the way the map is set up, but you don't have a lot of control over that. So what I do, I mean, yes, you can again increase the visibility, make it more in your face, which is not my style. Let's see if this does anything in here. So let's see. So we've got this bit here. Let's try to see if that changes if we set it back. No, it's just not overriding the amount of the paint map. So what you could do is click on this image texture, and then if you have Node Wrangler enabled, hit Control T and a mapping and texture coordinate setup will be created. We do not have an UV on that, so I'm going to disconnect that and put this to generated. And then you can play with scale and rotation and location. So here's our y-axis, so that must be our x. So let's try if you can move this foam a little bit to the left. And we can. Yep. We could play with scale and things like that. But that's how you could use a foam map. So let's close this down and make render number 3, hoping for a 1:04. This is actually quite interesting, I think, how different approaches and inputs actually affects and or have an impact on your render times. So let's see, 6. Maybe I'm going to cut this out and just present you with the final render, but you know what? I'm an old man, so I'm going to keep you waiting and keep you watching to see the results, but you can skip forward, of course, as well. Let's see. Well, are we going to make the 1 minute mark? 240. Well, 1 minute exactly, and that's how a foam map, or this specific foam map, looks like. It looks like more like an oily surface, so I'm not a fan of that. Again, let's make a quick comparison. First one, automatic within True Terrain by just playing with the distance. Number 2, painting our own map in. With white on black, and this is using image texture for our foam map. Now, personally, I think it doesn't really matter, but I think the manual map is the best one, so I'm going to disconnect this and hook our individual map in there as well again. And now I'm going to show you the how we can add some wetness to our terrain, because this shouldn't be so dry, of course. So the first thing we could and should do is add a shoreline. So we could do that, but this is another video, I think. Just let's just do wetness. Okay. First thing you need to decide is, where do I want the wetness to be displaced? On my ground or on my cliff? And if we go back to our blend settings, you can see that everything that is white is our cliff, and black and all these dots in here is our ground. So I would suggest that we are doing ground first. Let's just see what we can do. So let's move to our ground in here, and we've got our greens in here, and we've got this slider here, and we just increase the wetness. So what did this do? It actually made all this ground wet, so even the one over here. That's not actually what we want. So if we go back and bring this down to 0, go to our secondary, and we could do the same thing, just make it really black. Oh, you can see immediately all the secondary ground here, but also that is coming through through our cliff and mountainous area is going to be wet. Not very realistic as well. If you have a more clear-cut distinction where your materials are, you can use that option. But what we're going to do is, hey, manual wet map. So we do the same thing, but we don't need to prepare anything because our actual mesh already has geometry. So we go to our shaded window and we go to vertex paint. The only thing that is different is white is foam and black is wet, and that also rhymes a little bit, so maybe that is something you can memorize it by. Black is wet. So we don't need to change anything in here. We just move over here, go to black, and then we just paint, sorry, we should be able to see this. We don't, so okay, here we go. What was my problem? My problem was that I was on blur because I did an exercise for this video and forgot to turn it back. So we need to be in draw. Go to black, and then we can paint whatever we want in here. Get rid of this. So we're doing our own spots where we want. Let's make this a little bit more pronounced in here, a little bit less, a little bit more, something like this. Then we can again, could smear it like so. Let's be very messy, something like this. And we have black on white. Black is wet. Let's go to object mode, go in here, and do we see anything? No, we don't. And why? Because we didn't hook it up, of course. So what we're going to do is we are going to the vertex color here. We take the color and then we hook the color up to our manual socket. And you should see a difference. Again, let's not hooked up. And hooked up. And we could also, yeah, I'm only putting it into the secondary ground, so we could also put this into our first. So we see that everywhere where we've painted, you can see it much better now. We have this change of color, we've got this wetness look, not in your face, but fair enough. And we should be able to also take this, let's bring it down a bit, and hook this up to our cliff section. Manual. There we are. Now we have our paint map on the terrain as such, displayed on the cliff, and all ground nodes as well. So sorry for the hookup, but maybe this is something you have experienced, or hiccup, maybe if you experienced as well, and now we know where to look and how to solve it. So let's bring this very complex shader tree down. We could also, what we can do is now add a subdivision modifier to it. So we get rid of all these blocks. Yeah, something like this. Maybe even do adaptive. I mean, we will pay for that with render time, but we should be able to get a much smoother and nicer terrain. And as we're talking about all these manual paint maps, what we're going to do is do a new, no, let's go with weight paint. So let's go in here, because this is flat, this is horrible, I hate that. So what we're going to do is go to weight paint and put the place in here, something like this. And maybe a spot in here, and let's leave it like that. Let's go back to object mode. We've created a group. Let's call it, rename it. Usually a double click should suffice. There it is. Let's call it where trees should be. That's the name of our weight paint area, and then we're going to assets, go to our trees, keep it at low. Let's do ash trees, add the trees, they're everywhere, and now we've got the density maps, and we should only put it where trees should be. That's where they are. Go to asset setting, enable the LOD. Low is here, but we want medium in the full render. And we could also put a cloud in here, a shader, a volumetric, or the best version of course would be the clouds from True VDB. But that's not what we're going to do right now. We are going to do a render, and this will probably render too long for you to hang on. So I'm going to say goodbye. Hope that you have learned something useful on how I use manual paint maps or even external maps to increase our, not to increase, but to add wetness and foam maps to our terrain and water. Going to stop it right here, because the LOD usually, that's because I'm working with 4.1.3 in Blender 3.0, and this is not an officially supported version. So what we're going to do is we're actually disabling the LOD and setting the quality setting to medium. And there they are. This will of course take much more time, as I said, but yeah, I hope you found something useful. Saying bye for now, hope to see you in the next video, and I will leave you with the final render. Thanks, bye.